Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
The vast chamber of the future council hummed with tension. Rows of representatives from the farthest reaches of the galaxy sat in their designated sections, each one marked by the crest of their home planet. From the sparkling cities of Terra to the desolate mining colonies of Vesta Prime, every voice was meant to be heard in this grand hall. But for years now, it had been nothing more than a theater of conflict. Endless debates, endless posturing, and nothing of real consequence being decided. President Alaric Faulkner stood at the center, his gaze sweeping the council. He was no stranger to conflict, but this was different. The bickering factions had torn the council apart, leaving the entire interstellar civilization on the brink of collapse. Prosperity Coalition and Liberation Front, each vying for control, each unwilling to compromise. The core planets, wealthy and resource-rich, wanted to maintain their dominance. The outer colonies, barely scraping by, demanded equality. We cannot keep pretending that this council represents the people, Alaric thought, the weight of his presidency heavy on his shoulders. He had always believed in the ideals of democracy, but what had become of it now? It was nothing more than a broken machine, stuck in place, incapable of progress. As the debate raged around him, Alaric's mind turned to his solution, a radical idea, born from the frustrations of the very people he had sworn to protect. It was dangerous, he knew that. It could unravel the delicate balance that held the galaxy together. But doing nothing? That was far more dangerous. He had watched for years as the Prosperity Coalition used their wealth and power to manipulate decisions, leaving the outer colonies to fend for themselves. Entire worlds were falling into poverty, riots were breaking out, and there were whispers of rebellion. Something had to change. The speaker's voice broke through his thoughts. Senator Victoria Drayton, leader of the Prosperity Coalition, was in full stride, her voice cutting through the din like a blade. She was sharp, calculating, and utterly ruthless when it came to defending the interests of the core planets. We cannot allow these so-called outer worlds to dictate the course of our future, Drayton said, her eyes narrowing as she cast a glance toward the Liberation Front's representatives. The core planets are the backbone of this civilization. Without our resources, our infrastructure, none of you would be sitting here today. And yet, you demand equal say? Equal control? It's absurd. Governor Elena Marquez, representing one of the outer colonies, stood up to respond. Elena was young but fierce, her passion for her people clear in every word she spoke. We aren't asking for control, Senator, Elena said, her voice steady despite the tension. We're asking for fairness. Our people are starving while your planets hoard resources. Our infrastructure is crumbling, and you sit in your ivory towers, acting as though we don't exist. This council was meant to serve all of humanity, not just the privileged few. The debate was familiar, rehearsed even. It had played out 100 times before in the same tired cycle. Accusations, denials, promises that were never kept. And it would continue like this, indefinitely, unless something drastic happened. Alaric stood. The room quieted instantly, all eyes on him. As president, his voice still commanded respect, though he could feel that respect slipping away with each passing day. Enough, he said, his voice low but firm. This council is failing. You know it. I know it. And more importantly, the people know it. We have spent years arguing, debating, and yet we have accomplished nothing. The planets we represent are on the verge of collapse, and still, we bicker over scraps. Drayton's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting, President? That we simply abandon the council? Alaric shook his head. No. I'm suggesting that we take a different approach. One that reflects the realities of our current situation. The council, as it stands, cannot continue. It is broken, and it cannot be fixed by the same methods we have been using. He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of his words sink in. I propose a direct election, he said finally, his voice unwavering. Every citizen of the interstellar civilization will have a voice. Every man, woman, and child will be given the right to vote on the issues that matter to them, not through representatives, but directly. It is time we bring democracy back to the people. The room erupted. Shouts of outrage, disbelief, and anger filled the chamber. Drayton was on her feet instantly, her face twisted in fury. "This is madness," she shouted. "You want to hand over the future of our civilization to the uneducated masses? To the people who have no understanding of the complexities of governance? You will destroy everything we have built." Alaric remained calm, his gaze fixed on her. "What we have built is already crumbling. The people have lost faith in us. They no longer believe that this council represents them. If we continue down this path, they will rise up. And when they do, there will be no stopping the chaos that follows." Elena Marquez spoke up, her voice cutting through the noise. "The president is right. We can't keep pretending that this council works. It doesn't. And if we don't do something, the people will take matters into their own hands." Drayton's eyes flashed with anger. "You think the outer colonies will benefit from this? You think they will have any more power than they do now? The core planets control the majority of the population. A direct election will only solidify our control." Alaric smiled, though there was little warmth in it. "You underestimate the power of the people, Senator. When given a voice, they will use it. And they will demand change." The debate raged on for hours, but the seed had been planted. Alaric could see it in the eyes of the council members. Fear, uncertainty, and for some, hope. The idea of a direct election was radical, dangerous even. But it was also a chance for something new, something better. As the session finally adjourned, Alaric walked out of the chamber, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He knew this would not be easy. The forces arrayed against him were powerful, and they would not go down without a fight. But for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. The news spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Every media channel, every communication network buzzed with the story of the president's proposal. Some hailed it as a bold step toward true democracy, a chance for every citizen to have a voice in the future of the galaxy. Others condemned it as reckless, a dangerous gamble that could plunge the interstellar civilization into chaos. On the core planets, where wealth and power were concentrated, the reaction was overwhelmingly negative. The media, controlled by powerful corporations and political elites, launched a full-scale assault on the idea of a direct election. They painted a grim picture of what would happen if the uneducated masses were given control, warning of economic collapse, civil unrest, and the destruction of everything they had built. On the outer colonies, however, the reaction was different. For the first time, people felt that they had a chance to be heard, to have a say in the decisions that affected their lives. In the mining colonies of Vesta Prime, where workers toiled in dangerous conditions for barely enough to survive, the president's proposal was a beacon of hope. "We've been ignored for too long," one miner said in an interview, his face grimy with dust. "Maybe now, things will start to change." The political divide grew sharper by the day. Senator Victoria Drayton, leading the charge against the president's proposal, held rallies on the core planets, warning of the dangers of a mob rule. She was a master of rhetoric, her speeches designed to stoke fear and uncertainty. "We cannot allow the future of our civilization to be decided by those who have no stake in its success," Drayton said at one rally, her voice rising with passion. "The outer colonies do not understand the complexities of governance. They will vote for chaos, and we will all pay the price." But Governor Elena Marquez, the face of the movement supporting the president's plan, countered with her own rallies on the outer colonies. Her message was one of hope, of unity, of finally giving power back to the people. "The core planets have controlled our future for too long," she said to a crowd of colonists, their faces lined with hardship. "It's time for us to take back control. This is our chance to make sure that every voice is heard, that every person matters." As the day of the election approached, tensions reached a breaking point. Cyber attacks disrupted communication systems across the galaxy, with rumors swirling that powerful corporations were behind the sabotage, trying to prevent the election from happening. Protests broke out on several core planets, with citizens demanding that the president retract his proposal. The day of the election dawned under a tense and silent sky. Across the galaxy, from the shining spires of Terra to the dusty streets of the outer colonies, billions of citizens waited to cast their vote. The new voting system had been activated, an unprecedented technological feat designed to accommodate the entire population. Holographic voting terminals were set up in every city, every settlement, every corner of the interstellar civilization. Alaric stood in the command center, watching the data streams roll in on massive holographic screens. Each planet had its own feed, displaying live updates as the votes were cast and tallied. The room buzzed with activity as technicians monitored for any sign of trouble. The president had made it clear, the election must go forward, no matter what, but he could feel the tension in the air. Sabotage was still a possibility. The attacks on the voting infrastructure had been barely contained. If the system went down now, if the election failed, the resulting chaos could tear the galaxy apart. "Sir, we've detected a spike in interference from Sector 7, one of the technicians called out, his voice tight with urgency. "It looks like someone's trying to overload the system." Alaric moved to the technician's side, his eyes scanning the screen. Sector 7 was a critical hub, handling votes from dozens of outer colonies. If it went offline, millions of people would be disenfranchised. He clenched his jaw. "Is it coming from the outside or internal sabotage?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "Hard to say, but the attack's sophisticated. They're targeting the data stream in real time." Alaric's mind raced. If the attackers succeeded, the vote would be compromised, and everything he had worked for would be lost. He turned to his chief security officer, a hardened veteran named Marshal Korov. "Lock down Sector 7. Divert all available resources to stabilizing the network," Alaric ordered. "And find out who's behind this." Korov nodded and quickly relayed the orders. Alaric could see the strain on his team's faces, but they were professionals. They had prepared for this, knowing full well that forces would try to sabotage the election. For hours, the command center was a hive of frenzied activity. Alaric barely left his station, his eyes flicking constantly between screens, data streams, and the anxious faces of his staff. Outside, the galaxy teetered on the edge of chaos. Every minute felt like an eternity as the team battled to keep the voting system online, and then, just as it seemed the worst might happen, a breakthrough came. "Sir, we've pinpointed the source of the attack," a technician called out. "It's coming from a corporate outpost in the Deimos belt." They're trying to flood the system with false votes. Alaric's fists clenched. The corporations. Of course, they were behind it. He had suspected as much when the first signs of sabotage had appeared, but now he had proof. The corporations had grown rich and powerful in the chaos of the old council, manipulating the system for their own gain. They were terrified of a direct election, terrified of losing their influence. "Shut it down," Alaric said, his voice cold. "I want that outpost neutralized. Now." Within minutes, the attack was contained. The voting system stabilized, the false data purged from the network. A sense of cautious relief spread through the command center, but Alaric knew they weren't out of the woods yet. The corporations wouldn't give up so easily. He could already imagine the next move, the smear campaigns, the attempts to delegitimize the vote. But for now, the system held. As the hours ticked by, the votes continued to pour in. Across the galaxy, citizens from every walk of life logged in to cast their ballot. On the core planets, the vote was divided, with many fearing the loss of their privileged status. On the outer colonies, the turnout was unprecedented, with people eager for the chance to finally be heard. In the command center, the final results began to take shape. The holographic screen filled with data, the numbers flashing in real time. Alaric held his breath as the last votes were tallied. It was close. Closer than he had expected. But as the final numbers solidified, one thing became clear: the people had spoken. By a narrow margin, the vote had passed. The future council would be restructured, with direct elections allowing every citizen to participate in decision-making. It was a victory, but a fragile one. Alaric exhaled slowly, his hands gripping the edge of the console. It was done. After months of uncertainty, of sabotage and political maneuvering, the future of the galaxy had been decided, not by the elites, not by the corporations, but by the people. He turned to Korov, who stood beside him, a rare smile tugging at the corners of the old soldier's lips. "We did it," Alaric said quietly. Korov nodded. "We did. But this is just the beginning. The real work starts now." Alaric knew he was right. Winning the vote was only the first step. The challenge of rebuilding the future council, of making the new system work, loomed large. The forces that had opposed the vote, Drayton, the Prosperity Coalition, the corporations, wouldn't disappear overnight. They would fight tooth and nail to protect their interests, to maintain their power. But for the first time in years, Alaric felt hope. The people had chosen a new path, and now it was up to him to guide them through the turbulent times ahead. As the celebrations began in the streets below, Alaric stepped out onto the balcony of the command center. The lights of the capital city glittered beneath him, and in the distance, he could hear the sound of cheering. He had seen many political victories in his time, but this one felt different. It was the people's victory, not just his. He thought of Elena Marquez, of the outer colonies that had supported his vision. He thought of the miners on Vesta Prime, the workers in the slums of Terra, the countless citizens who had believed in the promise of something better. They had placed their trust in him, and now he owed it to them to deliver. Behind him, the door to the balcony slid open, and Elena stepped out, her expression one of cautious optimism. "We won," she said, joining him at the railing. "We did," Alaric replied, his voice quiet. "But the fight's not over." Elena nodded, her gaze drifting out over the city. "It never is. But at least now, we're fighting for something that matters." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the victory settling in. The future was uncertain, the challenges ahead immense, but for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of possibility. A sense that, perhaps, the galaxy could be something more than a battleground for competing interests. "Thank you, Elena," Alaric said finally, turning to her. "For believing in this. For believing in the people." She smiled faintly. "I didn't have much of a choice. My people didn't leave me much room to doubt." They shared a quiet laugh, the tension between them easing slightly. They had been through so much, and now, standing on the other side, it felt surreal. "Now we rebuild," Alaric said, his voice filled with determination. "We have a chance to create something new. Something that works for everyone." "And we will," Elena replied, her voice firm. "We'll make sure of it." As the city below erupted in celebration, Alaric allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The galaxy had chosen its path, and while the road ahead was uncertain, he knew that together, they could forge a new future. One where every voice mattered, where every person had a stake in the future of their civilization. The battle for the Future Council was over. But the battle for the future of humanity had only just begun.